The painter Howard Hodgkin was Britain's representative at the Venice Biennale in 1984, and in 1985 he won the prestigious Tate Gallery Turner Prize. When we introduced him to the Quantel Paintbox, he decided to experiment over 2 days with some ideas for sets and costumes for Stravinsky's Commedia dell'arte ballet, Pulcinella.
The red arch which you see here is meant to represent the proscenium of the Grand Theatre at Leeds, where the first performance of a new production of the ballet Pulcinella by Stravinsky will be presented by Ballet Rambert, with choreography by Richard Alston and sets and costumes by myself. Pulcinella was first presented by Diaghilev in 1920, with sets by Picasso, choreography by Massine, and music by Stravinsky after Pergolesi. What you are going to see are ideas which will probably all be either greatly changed or even totally rejected by the time the ballet is produced. They are very much in the nature of first thoughts. I have therefore invented the positions of the dancers, which are these sort of vestigial figures which you'll see from time to time. And the number of them and the grouping are all entirely hypothetical. using this process makes almost too easy is the speed with which you can change from one idea to another and obliterate something and then bring it back. But here one can see particularly well the extraordinary luminosity of the colour, which I can't think of any way of achieving otherwise. But I'm certainly going to try, because it does, and somehow the music seems to require very sharp, very brilliant colour. Of a kind I would never use when I was painting pictures. Changing from one colour to another is very straightforward. One has to just give a rather sharp tap on the square of colour which you require, and you have a perfectly clean new colour. The music divides into a succession of very fast, very short numbers, and the problem for the designer is to make the dancers look different very, very quickly, and to make the stage picture change radically. And to do this at great speed is a technical problem which I've yet to solve, but one of the ideas I had was to have a freestanding screen in the middle of the stage space and project images onto it. it was very useful to be able to make a stencil for the costumes, which can then be just filled in with different patterns. The costume designs, apart from this one, which would mean dyeing the dancer blue all over of all the parts you could see, are mostly things which I think I will use. Here I'm trying to make a sort of trompe-l'oeil edging, which is not the proscenium arch as such, but the edge of the screen. Because I want to make an illusionistic pattern very often on this screen, so it'll be like a stage within a stage, or sort of little almost like a puppet theatre, which, without being in any way a literal repetition, would be like the Commedia dell'arte stages that were set up in the street. But the trouble, of course, with using a Commedia dell'arte convention is that it's been done to death almost every generation. But equally, of course, the great advantage of it is that it's such a cliché. If one can only make it strong enough a cliché, then you can do quite the opposite with it. curious sound that you can hear is me, as you can now see, banging away, which is actually curiously hard work. It isn't just thinking about it, but you have to hit it quite smartly. Hit the console with a light pen quite smartly to get one of these spots, and they are very difficult to control. And so it's really the rhythm of the movement and the desperation with which the movements are made that produces this effect. I don't at all understand how the machine works, but insofar as what one can do with it, some of it is incredibly easy, like these painted brush strokes, made by just sort of scratching the surface quite lightly, and you get an effect which is beautifully liquid, but the spots are another matter. They're really a physical killer to execute. But for me, the enormous and, in the end, crippling disadvantage of using this technique is that you have to think so quickly. The concentration is totally different from when one's using gouache, for example, or acrylic, any kind of paint. It's only doing this that one realizes, well, a lot of time is spent washing out the brush, mixing the color, applying it to the paper, time in which one can consider and think, and no doubt feel. With this, you have to do all that immediately, and it's incredibly fatiguing, and I think probably in the end, for me, misleading. I think it's misleading most because some of the effects are so easy to get, and they have nothing to do with the real world. They're not like a piece of paper you hold in your hand or can hang on the wall. They have no physical life other than when they're being projected. And so I don't feel any kind of physical affinity really with what I'm doing and with what I see on the screen. And that's why you see these rather strained and anguished expressions on my face. They're really the attempt to relate the normal way I would feel to something which is totally alien to it. It has no texture. For example, you have none of the checks and balances of moving a brush across a rough surface which resists and therefore affects what you do. And perhaps even using it for something as really quite practical as this, it's sort of building castles in the air.
Hodgkin went on piling image on image, his veils of colour now almost obliterating the original one. This layering of colour of one image on top of another is precisely how Hodgkin makes his own paintings in the studio. But there's one important difference. He often takes 4 or 5 years to finish one. Now the Paintbox is speeding up his working methods to an almost impossible degree.
These perhaps embarrassingly simplistic patterns that are now appearing are meant to evoke the patterns on Harlequin's costumes, and I thought one way of getting round vexing question of Commedia dell'arte and Harlequin and Columbine and so forth was to use some of the designs in the setting rather than on the figures themselves. This extraordinary instrument can do an enormous number of different things, in fact so many that I deliberately limited it to a few of the strongest colours, and I have not mixed them together at all because they lose their power then. And the different pressure on the light pen means that you can use transparent white, something which I've always been very keen on, but normally you can't do it, except with oil paint, anything with the freedom that you can here. Hard perhaps to believe these are meant to be trees on either side, which have changed from ordinary little deciduous trees to great big blue flowers on spotted trunks. And though they appear here as taking rather a long time to achieve, I hope that eventually something equivalent can be done very, very quickly on the stage. These red lines aren't meant to evoke a prison cell or anything like that. They're simply to change the colour and make a new plane, something to look through. And then these white pillars on either side, which I'm making very slowly. I don't know how those could be done. I don't yet know, until Richard has done the choreography, rather finished it, how much the dancers themselves can be used to participate in moving things about or changing what one sees. Perhaps not at all. The great problem for me is to say enough, or perhaps that isn't quite the right way of putting it, but add enough to what Richard is doing and what the music says in a very short space of time. To make something visually expressive. Which doesn't either interfere with the dancing but enhances it and also expresses something about the music. It's very, very difficult. But it is something I've long wanted to try and do. In fact, without being specific at all, I think it's necessary to evoke some kind of particular setting, some kind of anchor the action, both in time and place, and in a way which is neither incoherent nor too generalized. Here I go even further, trying to make a reasonably generalized image that still does evoke commedia dell'arte or a harlequinade at least, or masquerade anyway. to be forced to think at appalling speed and to be put in the instant sort of anxiety state by the demands of this machine has been extremely useful. It's filled me with ideas which I probably would have taken months and months to even get near. It's the pressure of having to work so fast, to think so quickly, and to think so radically in some ways is clearly very useful.